Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. My name is Katja Eisbrenner. I'm from Ecofys, and I'm very happy that we can share with you today a webinar, which is called a NAMA for the electrification of Sialkot with PV technology. The webinar is hosted by CDKN, and Ecofys did the project together with PITCO, and I'm very happy to inform you of the presenters today. That will be myself. I'm a director at Ecofys, a Navigant company, and Noemi Klein, who is an associate director at Ecofys. And we have Mohammed, who will be available for questions from PITCO, who helped working on the project on the NAMA on the ground. A couple of technical announcements. We will have two presentations today, one by myself and then one by Noemi. We will then have a question and answer session where you can raise your questions. We will not use the raise hand button, so feel free to type in your questions directly in the question and answer field. We will then, after the presentations, address them. And I think we're a group where we can really have also maybe get into a little bit of a dialogue. At the end of the session, there will be a small poll, including 3 questions that CDKN would like to ask, and that will automatically be happening on your screen, so you don't need to do anything with that. We would just like to ask you to participate in that. Okay, a few notes on the organizers or how this project was set up. The project was financed by CDKN. CDKN is housed in LEAD Pakistan, an NGO with 20 years in the country. They have supported the project from the beginning on. And as most of you know, they have been very active in supporting decision makers with advisory support, doing research, and also on the groundwork. And we're very happy that we had the opportunity to work together. But at the same time also that they supported this NAMA activities. At a glance, Ecofys, a Navigant company, some of you may know Ecofys. We are a global consulting company founded in 1984 with a mission to enable sustainable energy for everyone. Since 2016, we are part of Navigant's global energy practice, which brings us now to 5 offices in 4 countries. We have more than 20 offices together with the Navigant in the Middle East, also in the US and Hong Kong, and over 600 experts we're working together with. We are focusing on connecting the dots with a triangle between governments, energy players, and energy-intensive end users. And NAMAs are a concrete example where that connecting the dots is very much needed, and you will see that a little bit during the presentations today. As mentioned, we have been working with PITCO, a consultancy based in Pakistan, who have been the partner from the beginning on, playing a very important role in bringing together the different stakeholders and really having a connection from international work with 3DKN networks, Ecofys, and also Pakistan local experience. Ecofys has worked on NAMAs actually, and I myself, since they really started. They started off in the Bali Action Plan 2007, when nobody really knew what a NAMA, nationally appropriate mitigation action, was. And I think in 2009, we started really trying to get our head around it, to what it means. And what I like to say always, NAMAs are really a good means to mitigation actions on the ground. And I will share a little bit over this in this presentation today. So actually here we see what PITCO has, 15 years of consultancy services in energy and climate. As you know, since Paris, we all have very many NDCs available, and NAMAs are a great instrument for me to implement the country's NDCs. National determined contributions for me, and that's a personal view, set the goalpost of where we need to go, what we need to do, but then we still need to do it on the ground, and NAMAs are for me the means to do it. Whether we call it a NAMA or whether we call it a mitigation actions, all possible. for me, it's the same. It's a project on the ground, cross-sectoral, really looking into getting the local presence, the private sector, and the public sector together to increase the likelihood of mitigation uptake from bottom up. A few words on the Pakistan situation, and especially the political situation. Pakistan's development strategy is guided by its Vision 2025, which aims to put the country on fast track of development to become one of the 20 largest world economies by 2025. The vision lays out 8 priority areas, amongst which are meeting the basic needs of the growing population, in particular their access to essential services, health, education, energy, water, and sanitation, and also protecting natural resources and addressing climate change. And NAMA, as you may know, is set out to also look at not only mitigation actions, but sustainable development benefits, safeguards, and so it attributes to several of these development goals. As a contribution to the Paris Climate Agreement, Pakistan submitted an updated version of its national determined contribution to the UN SDCC in late 2016. The NAMA is really focusing on the energy supply, especially in the situation of in Sialkot Valley, and I will say a little bit about that in a minute. And it is focusing on small and medium enterprises. If we look at what makes a NAMA successful, and especially also then already translated, what would the Sialkot NAMA make it successful? It consists of 6 very important elements. That's stakeholder engagement, its co-benefits, finance, MRV, transformation, and integration. And they all play their role, and that's why it takes a long time to develop a NAMA, but at the same time also has a positive advantage. It brings together the different stakeholders, it looks at the transformational capacities, and it also looks at integrating it really with the national priorities, as also outlined in Pakistan's NDCS. And you'll hear a little bit later also what these different benefits are for the situation. The industrial city of Sialkot is located in the northeast of the Punjab province in Pakistan. It hosts 11,000 SMEs, which correspond to almost 25% of the total SMEs in the countries. Sialkot is an emblematic industrial city. The flagship industry is sports, which supplies 40 million footballs a year, an estimated 70% of the global production of hand-sewn footballs. The Pakistan energy sector has difficulties. One could also say it's in a crisis. Inadequate electricity supplies cost the country $14 billion annually, and some 11,000 small and medium enterprises operate at just 60% of their capacity. The industrial city of Sialkot in the Punjab region, the focus of this NAMA, is not an exception. The city of Sialkot is one of Pakistan's leading industrial hubs with a mainly export-oriented industry. However, the strong economic growth has increased electricity demand at a rate that is difficult to satisfy with existing grid infrastructure, leading to frequent blackouts. And that's also the reason why this NAMA has been set up the way it has been set up, to involve the SMEs and also together with the government to look at a potential solution. In addition to the experiencing average blackouts of roughly 3 hours per day, for some SMEs, electricity prices have almost tripled from 2007 to 2015. The need for reliable electricity had led the Sialkot industrials to heavily rely on diesel generators, which have bad effects for health, climate, and also financial impacts. To ensure a sustainable economic growth of the Sialkot industry, electricity needs not to only be reliable, but also more affordable in the long run. Looking at which technologies are actually, and that's part of the feasibility study, also when we looked at how this NAMA would develop, we looked at the different opportunities And the assessment found that Sialkot's location has poor wind energy resources, hydroelectricity is accessible but insufficient, and grid solar is very expensive. When we look at the goal of the NAMA, the overall goal is to reduce the demand for fossil fuel-based and grid-connected energy in the Sialkot industrial sector, and also the associated GHG emissions. And at the same time, increasing the reliability of electricity with the uptake of PV solar rooftop systems. As part of the Punjab energy strategy, the NAMA is expected to reduce 150,000 tons CO2 equivalent of emissions by replacing up to 30% of electricity consumption in the Sialkot, and then at the same time developing strong sustainable development co-benefits. And it will also create, and that's on the next slide, I believe, yes, and that is looking at co-benefits. And if we look at the overall setup of the NAMA, it's expected that about 1,000 direct full-time jobs will be produced. And that is looking at also at the reduction of NOx and SOx, and especially because the diesel will be reduced. There is, in addition, one of the things that also this whole blackout and disruptive energy system, it will also be more reliable and also much more resilient and in the setup much more economic than the infrastructure projects if they were done on large scale. Looking at the positive effects, the way it also, and that's anticipated here, and it's in more detail outlined in the report, that there will be also the creation of new companies possible, especially they are a new business model, there's new battery powers, there's different setups that will be happening. That slide is quite overloaded with a lot of information. What I would like to highlight in this presentation is that when we start looking at the NAMA, our experience shows that you need different components to make it successful. That is at the same time the challenge, but also, as I said, the success factor. Important is to really look at what are the different barriers to the NAMA. And in this case, it's what identified low access to finance. There was no sufficient technical support. There was also low awareness on how all these different technology works. And all of those come with associated risk that sometimes then create an environment where something that is actually very lucrative or possible doesn't identify the right opportunities here. That was from the start when before we actually started to develop the NAMA. Looking then at the NAMA, it's important that it has the financial, the technical, and the awareness component. And especially here, if we look at the financial component, the objective is to increase access to finance for investments in rooftop PV in the Sialkot industrial sector. And the technical component, and we will hear a little bit more also from Noemi on the financial component, and that was also discussed with experts on the ground. We were talking to involving banks and to really understand what financial elements are there. On the technical component, the objective is to create a market for PV rooftop panels in the Sialkot industrial sector by improving the regulatory environment and providing the technical capacity to ensure the functioning of the PV rooftop systems. And that is where it comes in, ties in also the experience of the government, the policy type framework that need to work together with the local components. And last but not least, it also has an awareness component, and the objective of the awareness component is to communicate the technical and economic benefits of rooftop PV panel in Sialkot. And that cannot to be underestimated of how that can act as a multiplier effect and how important that is that this goes together. What we have seen over the past years, and also when looking for financing for these projects, that it's fundamental to have them integrated from the beginning on, and that is why we were very happy also to work with PITCO and also linking it to the government to come up with a structural setup. In the next slides, and I will not go into detail, this is to show you, give you a little bit of a flavor of how who will all be involved. So on the top right-hand side, you see all the different government bodies and specific groups that are existing already in Pakistan, which have a say or are somehow related to all the different topics that are involved in the NAMA. And what we call here PMU, which is the project management unit, is something that was identified throughout the project as fundamental. We're now here talking about small and medium enterprises, which don't act as one voice or are not difficult to bring together to have really somebody driving it jointly. So that was one of the conclusions in the NAMA, that it's very important to have one group that is actually moving it across and starting the implementation with the different bodies. And that is something that is not set up yet, so that is something that would have to would be part of now when if the NAMA gets financing, to looking into how that would work. Then, and that's an even more complex slide, but the advisory board will important to bring the different interests of all these different stakeholders together, while the PMU is really dealing with the practical implementation of how that specifically would work. And that is something where a lot of thought went into it, and it's also very important for any beneficiary or any donor agency who might be supporting this activity. Just to show you there's different timelines involved. We have laid this out in detail, looked at who is responsible within the ministry, within the SMUs itself, who can take which role, and how to advance this discussion. Important is, and that has been part of for any of these schemes, especially when they're big, it's a question of monitoring and reporting. Is what the costs, the NAMA, the emission reductions, the NAMA cost, has it all really taken place? And I don't want to overemphasize it, because I do think sometimes we can get into a mode of over-analyzing things that may happen in the end. But I do think it is very important, especially when we come to large scale, to build trust, to show the impact that the NAMA or any mitigation action can take place. So there are the different combinations of, like, starting with the situation. Is there actually a situation where a NAMA could work? And that has clearly shown the case here in the Sialkot NAMA. The in-depth assessment results, and that is where we really looked into the local situation together with PITCO to understand, is there actually a case for a NAMA? What would the specific elements of the financial component be needed? And then also look of what would then the implementation take. And it does take, and that's something I think it's very important, and maybe Mohammed can give us some insights on the current situation with the government. NAMAs are a combination of a government action combined with the private sector, involving the different key stakeholders, so in this case, the small and medium enterprises, to make a NAMA possible and happen. With this, I would like to hand over to Noemi, who will provide some more insights on how a NAMA can be financed, and I will connect later on the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Katja. So I'll good morning or good evening to everyone, depending on where you are in the world. I will take over, and I will, as Katja introduced, look at the financing aspect in a bit more detail. So you should be able to see my screen shortly. And this is an important component, because without funding, be it private or public, the NAMAs can't go ahead. So they get stuck at the idea stage, and they can't realize the mitigation benefits. And this is unfortunately the situation for most of the NAMAs at the moment. So we've been working with various countries to help them move forward with their NAMA ideas. And many people and many organizations around the world are doing the same. And as you can see on this slide, the number of NAMAs has been increasing since 2011 for the past few years, but most of them are still under development, and I'll go in a bit more detail on what it means to be under development versus implementation. But the message to remember here is that most of the NAMAs are still looking at how they could be framed, but they don't have a source of funding or sources, because several sources of funding are needed, identified. And this is, when I say most of them, it's over 90%. So only about 9.4% of the NAMAs in the pipeline, so 19 out of the 203 are under implementation. And this data comes from an annual report that we in Ecofys are preparing with our colleagues at ECN. And if you want to know more about which types of NAMA, their geographical spreads, and their status, you can refer to the latest annual report that we produced in November, and there is an upcoming one that will be released in May very soon. So as you can see, of the 19 implemented NAMA, even there, most of them are still in the earliest stages, 2/3, and 1/3 has received some funding. So efforts are really focusing right now on mobilizing the resources to help this NAMA really get off the ground and mitigate emissions. And so to come back to the definition of development or implementation, development is really the idea stage. So when a government has an idea on a mitigation action, as Katja mentioned before, NAMA is a label, but what is important there is that the focus is on mitigation with sustainable development co-benefits. So under development, governments have an idea and they have an intention to seek support to make this idea a reality. And the sectors and the overall actions to reach this goal have been identified. Then for this NAMA to move to the implementation stage, it has to reach a few more milestones, namely around the planning, so to have a clear set of activities, and we'll see later what that can be. And Katja mentioned some for Sialkot around not only the technical part, but also the financial part. And besides a description of the activities and timeline, having cost estimates as well, so that the NAMA proponents can engage with financiers. And of course, a clear idea of the greenhouse gas mitigation impact and the co-benefits, as this is the core of a NAMA compared to any other policy. And with this information, what is missing is the funding to make it a reality. And this is where, as we saw before, quite a few NAMAs are stuck, and this is also where the NAMA Sialkot is at. And I'll go into a bit more detail on the Sialkot NAMA in particular. To come back to the pipeline, just to give you a flavor of what types of NAMA are moving towards implementation, you can see, as I mentioned, that mostly they are still at the early stage of the pipeline. So the one on the left on appraisal and financing approved, and some of them are partially funded and are going ahead. And some of you who are familiar with the world of NAMAs might recognize some NAMAs that have been known and talked about for a little while, like sustainable housing in Mexico, which started a while back. So you can see that this whole process of structuring a NAMA and especially getting it funded is long. And as Katja mentioned before, it's important that most of the stakeholders, including the financial sector, is involved from the start to really build something together that is not only an idea on paper, but something that can be realized and invested in. And when we talk about funding and financing, what do we talk about here? There are two main sources of finance, or they can be categorized as the public finance coming from or disbursed by governments directly, or by funds that are filled in by government, like the Green Climate Fund and NAMA Facility. And I'll go through these ones in more detail afterwards, as I will focus on that. And this public finance, the idea is to use it as smartly as possible, to need as little as possible, to reduce the risks and lower the cost of capital, so that the private sector can then get involved and provide the much needed private finance, which is usually the volumes of the private finance are much higher. And private finance, if we simplify it, it's usually to invest in or purchase low carbon technologies, so like the PVs in the case of Sialkot. And here you can see on this slide a few examples of instruments from the public sector and the private sector. And as I said, I will focus here on the public finance, which can come in a variety of forms: grants, loans, guarantees. And I will go through the Sialkot NAMA afterwards. But before, I'm going to present briefly a NAMA that is moving towards implementation. And it's a NAMA in Tunisia to scale up renewable energy and energy efficiency in the building sector through three programs. One is supporting the installation of solar water heaters for households, called ProSol. The other one, supports the installation of PVs for household, that is ProSol Elec. And then finally, an installation program, PromoIsol, again for household mostly. And we have been working with the Tunisian government, as well as the German government and GIZ, to develop this NAMA over the past few years. And it was submitted to the NAMA facility during the last call, and we received a good news that it was selected for the, you can see DDP on the screen, so the detail preparation phase. And so this is a phase before the NAMA facility decides on whether it will grant full support to the NAMA or not, but it is an indication that the NAMA is well structured to receive funding, including on the financing part. And here you can see, so NSP is NAMA facility, jargon is NAMA support project. It's where the focus of the NAMA facility support will be. And you can see that there are different types of support, including grants that I mentioned before, and the grant from the NAMA facility would, for example, enable the interest rate at which the international development banks are lending to commercial banks in Tunisia to be lowered by 2%, and also the exchange risk to be covered, which allow finances to feel comfortable to go and put money in Tunisia. So as you can see here, it's really about mitigating risks and lowering the cost of capital, so that then commercial banks can in turn lend money to the actors in Tunisia directly and enable the end users, so the household in this case, to purchase PVs at under conditions that are acceptable for them. So if we go back to the Sialkot NAMA, the Sialkot NAMA is advanced, and what needs to happen now is to identify the financiers and refine the financial mechanism. And we've been working with the NAMA stakeholders on the ground to look at what option they have in terms of public support. And specifically the Sialkot NAMA, as Katja presented, already has worked on identifying specific activities, costs, timelines, mitigation outcome, and has been communicated to the UNFCCC. So it is at a stage where it can move forward and get the money effectively. If we go into the financing scheme, so first I'll mention the components that Katja touched upon, and then I look into the types of support that is needed. So there is a financial, a technical, an awareness component that are helping the environment to enable investment. And then there are the investment per se, so the capital costs in the PVs directly. And of course, the capital costs are the highest, as I mentioned at the start. What is really important is the investment, the private investment in the technologies, and the other sources or the financing inputs should really enable that to be unlocked. So if we don't have the other components, the people will not be able to invest. So these capital costs will never materialize. And what is asked in terms of financing overall, it is about 95 million, and there are different types which relate to types of financing that I mentioned, or financing instruments that I mentioned earlier on. You've got grants, and this is mostly for these enabling activities that I mentioned, so the awareness components, the management, the financial component to lower transaction costs, and technical component, as well as some capital costs. So sometimes grants are also used as subsidies to lower capital costs, and then the bulk of it is loans, and you will have some equity as well. And in some cases, like here, there is some in-kind contribution, meaning resources and time from NAMA stakeholders. For example, here the government. So the big question is, of course, how to get this money. As I said, the capital cost for the investment, this is the private sector once it is enabled to do so. And so it's this public sector enabler, or public sector money enabler, that we looked at with the NAMA proponents in Sialkot. And before I go into the specific sources that we looked at, so the GCF and the NAMA facility, I'm going to say a few words about multilateral climate finance. And we did a specific report on that as part of the mitigation momentum project that we're doing with ECN, which also published the NAMA status report that I mentioned at the start. And in that, we looked specifically at multilateral climate finance and also included the GCF, and what were some recommendations for NAMA proponents to be able to access this type of finance. So the first step is to identify the possible financier, because the landscape of finances can be complex and daunting. There are various activities, various initiatives, as I mentioned at the start, from bilateral, from funds. So it's identifying which ones they are, what their requirements are, the objectives are, what the finances are looking for, because a multilateral development bank or a fund might have overlap in the criteria for funding, but they also have specificities, for example, in terms of regions or in terms of technologies they want to be involved in. So these are points 1 and 2 on the slide. And if you go to point 3, communication and coordination with stakeholders is key. So it's important to reach out to the right people. For example, some of the multilateral development banks have preferred contacts with the finance ministries, but NAMAs might be developed by environmental ministries. So then there needs to be some coordination and communication there to make sure that all the stakeholders are on board and are clear on what the NAMA is about and what it needs. And then point 4 highlights that these contacts, and as Katja had highlighted, need to happen from the start. So the finances need to be involved so that all stakeholders can develop a NAMA that meets the requirements of the country, that are helping the country to implement its climate change and other strategies, but also meet the finances requirements. And then, of course, it's a matter of putting that on paper and developing funding proposals that are in line with the requirements for the finances. And in that exercise, it's important to identify the various sources of financing, including private sector finance. So the co-financing aspect is an important one to ensure success. As I mentioned before, I'm coming back now to the Sialkot NAMA, and we looked at the Green Climate Fund and the NAMA facility. And some of you might be familiar with either or both of these sources of public funding. The Green Climate Fund is a large fund, a large multilateral fund that is filled in by countries, and it's linked to the UNFCCC. And so far, it has committed 2.2 billion. So it's the largest fund. But some of you might have heard the magical number of $100 billion by 2020 through the GCF. So there is still a way to go to ramp up the activities under the GCF. And then it's about half mitigation adaptation, or that's the idea. And the other one is the NAMA facility, which is the largest dedicated fund for NAMAs, particularly because the GCF targets mitigation and adaptation programs and projects in general, but the NAMA facility is looking at mitigation actions that are labeled as and structured as NAMA, and they have committed about $270 million in various rounds of calls for project, and the last one was the 4th round and was last year, and they're still looking at which project to support, as I mentioned, for our Tunisian one. And you'll see that there are similarities in the way these operate and in the requirements that these funders have. And the GCF is very much putting emphasis on the country ownership. So there will be proponents for the project that will need to engage with entities in the country, governmental entities in the countries. And they need to work with accredited entity as well to make sure that the GCF money is disbursed in an efficient way and in line with the GCF main criteria. And on the right of the slide, you can see some of these criteria. The GCF wants to make sure that the money they're disbursing has an impact in terms of mitigation and adaptation, and this impact is long-term and sustainable. And they want this impact to be transformational, so that's the paradigm shift potential. And then they want to make sure that besides mitigation, of course, sustainable development benefits are part of the project, and that this is strongly embedded in the country strategy, and that responds to needs that have been identified by the country as opposed to just being project needs. And of course, that needs to be done in an efficient and effective way, money-wise, as the GCF wants to maximize the impact of each dollar they will put in a project. And when I say maximize, that might be, for example, in terms of leverage of private sector money. They want to have as many dollars of private sector money invested for each dollar they're putting in. And then there is a funding proposal that needs to be prepared, and it's usually similar. So you have to describe the project, describe why it should benefit from the GCF funding, how the GCF funding will be used, how the project will be monitored, and that this is something that Katja touched upon before. And what we said for NAMA, for Sialkot, was that they should work with a GCF regional advisor, because the GCF has advisors in various regions of the world that know very well the GCF as well as the regional context. They should contact an NDA or a focal point, or the NDA or focal point in Pakistan early on to engage them and ensure country ownership, and then work with an entity that is already accredited to disburse GCS fund. Otherwise, you need to go through the whole accreditation process, which is very long and cumbersome. And finally, something that can help as well is to first do a concept note, a short concept note before preparing a full proposal, to get the buy-in from various stakeholders and an initial feedback on the GCF, from the GCF, on whether the project is going in the right direction. For the NAMA facility, project proponents have to fill in an outline, which again is fairly similar to what is required from the GCF. It's again about describing the project, describing the financing need, saying how the finance will be needed to implement the NAMA and reach the objective. And there is a lot of information on this slide, but it's to show you that for the GCF as well as the NAMA facility, the process is fairly long, involves various stakeholders, So it needs to be thought through and planned before starting to increase or maximize the chances of success and the chances of the project to get implemented. For the NAMA facility, what we said for Sialkot was to regularly check what the state of the NAMA facility is. So the fourth crawl just finished or last year, so keeping an eye on the future calls. Also, again, like for the JCF, work with an entity that is experienced. So here it's a support organization to help the NAMA proponents get on top of the requirements. And to focus on financial mechanism. This is something that is important for the NAMA facility to, again, understand what financing is needed, the role of the different financiers, how the finance will be used. Again, ultimately, in a so-called smart way to use public finance to leverage private sector finance. And I will stop here to keep some time for questions. These are links to some of the documents that I mentioned during my talk, on notably the paper on multilateral development finance, and you can find that on our website. And now I'm going to hand over back to Katja, who will moderate the questions.
Okay. Thank you, Noemi, for this insight into the climate finance aspect of the NAMAs. I see already one question that is posted here. I will read it out. And thank you for posting the question. This is somebody asking from, and I will not say names because I'm not sure if you agree to that, but I just say your affiliation, and that's the Green School of Korea University. And the question is, what is the calculated impact of the GHG emission reductions of the Sialkot PV NAMA with the reference to the NDC target of 20% reduction of the BAU? And I must say, I don't think that we have calculated that specifically. It's probably an exercise that can be done, but that was not the goal, and therefore we did not look into that in detail. And therefore, I unfortunately cannot answer that. However, I also encourage you to send some more questions if you have any, and maybe in the meantime we can ask Mohamed. Maybe you know if we calculated that, or if you have any other additions.
Hello?
Mohamed, can you? Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so sorry, I was away for a second. Do you want me to answer the question?
Yeah, the question was, did we calculate the impact of the NAMA on the NDC projections?
Yes, the question here says that how do we relate to the target of 20% reductions in the annual emissions, right? The business as usual emissions, yeah. From what we calculated, the NAMA would contribute to reductions of about 36% compared to the business as usual. As Katja mentioned during her presentation, that the project, the NAMA would lead to around 150,000 tons of CO2 reductions, and this was coming from 200 gigawatt-hour per year. And now, since this electricity is a mix of grid electricity and diesel, this contributes to around 36% of their total electricity consumption.
Okay, thanks. Then I didn't get that right. Excellent.
Okay.
Do we get any more questions? I don't see any more questions, but maybe then I have a question, another question for you, Mohammed. Since the project has finished, can you give us an update on the current activities, maybe other activities from the government, or what do you think needs to happen next, and what support is needed? Maybe we also have somebody from development banks joining, we never know. So what's this current status? How do you see that?
Yes, from the government side, there has been some development with regards to promotion of renewable energy. Just recently, the State Bank of Pakistan has launched a renewable energy refinance facility in which they are offering very lucrative loans to all project proponents that wish to install renewable energy projects. So the government is working towards that, but the main thing that we learned while working on the Sialkot NAMA project was that the Sialkot industry wants to see pilot projects. And that is what I believe is really needed to really kickstart the whole adoption of solar PV by the industrial sector of Sialkot.
Thank you, excellent. Are there more questions? I don't see any more questions. Considering that we're actually only a few minutes before the top of the hour when the webinar ends, I would like to ask Anna to put on there is one more question, okay. I can see the questions. There is one more question, I cannot see it. Chat. Okay. Okay, follow-up question. Excellent. Anna, if you could put on the poll. Before we do that, I would like to thank all of you for joining today. If you have any questions afterwards, you can find the contact details in the presentation. You can all, which I'm sure you will be sent the link to. You can also approach us directly if you want to learn more about any of the activities, and we'll be attending, Noemi and I, events that are coming up. We will be at the Innovate for Climate conference. We will be at an NDC event in Berlin next week at a conference. So you will see us around, and we're looking forward to stay in touch. And with that, thank you. And Anna, please put up the poll.